So, you want to hear a story, huh? A tale of adventure across the stars. Come, listen to old Marcus. Have I got a story for you?
It's kind of crazy to think that it's been 7 years since we got Borderlands 2, and now here we are in 2019 with Borderlands 3, the sequel to the pre-sequel, say that 5 times fast, developed by Gearbox Software. Borderlands 3 has been out for about a week or so now, or if you're one of those people waiting for this thing to hit Steam, well, it's still not out for another 6 months. Now, after having spent about 50 hours playing it up to this point, I thought I should probably get down to brass tacks and get this review sorted. Borderlands is a game series where you're usually on some kind of godforsaken planet, choosing from 1 of 4 characters to play as, killing lots of ugly looking enemies that often babble off complete nonsense, along with looting all of the guns. You can play solo like a total loser, or with friends like a total loser, which is really the ideal way to play it, only because the game becomes tougher and ultimately more fun the more people that are playing. Taking place after the events in Borderlands 2, the villain or the villains of the week are the Calypso twins, a couple of sirens that have amassed an army of followers called the Children of the Vault, through a show that they televise across the galaxy.
Don't forget to like, follow, and obey.
Imagine if in real life there was some kind of YouTuber that had an equally brain-dead sibling, and a following of complete morons, and you get the idea. Oh, wait. Tyreen and her brother Troy are here to wreak havoc as they're trying to open up a bunch of vaults on different planets, which in turn reunites the player with returning characters like Moxie, Ellie, Patricia Tannis, as well as a few other characters from Telltale Games' spin-off series, Tales from the Borderlands.
Oh, this? This is my siege mustache.
So in terms of the size of the cast, it's probably the biggest one yet, with voice acting and writing that's a mix of being passable and then so bad and cringy that you'd rather stick metallic chopsticks in your ears and fling yourself off a rooftop. This new group of Vault Hunters is another bunch of likeable, chaotic neutral outcasts that are answering the call to action. And here you've got Flack the Beastmaster, Mose the Gunner, Zane the Operative, and Amara the Siren, who has one of the most bodacious six-packs I've ever seen. I mean, damn. And the character you choose to play as is going to affect how the game plays out in a pretty significant way. Not that you really need to stick to that decision. Borderlands is a game series that's always been about replaying the campaign multiple times with all of the characters. In fact, if you don't try all of these out at least once, well, then you're playing the game wrong. Now, I don't think really anyone could possibly claim to have mastered all of these characters, and anyone who says so is talking out of their ass. I played the game for about 50 hours spread across each Vault Hunter, and even then I still haven't hit max level with all of these. The one I spent the most time with was Amara the Siren, but I'll do my best to explain how the new skill system works. Right, so in the past what happened was you chose a character and they came with a single skill. In Borderlands 3, each character has 3 skills. And in some cases you can mix and match these and upgrade each of them separately through their own unique trees. You can then swap back and forth between these on the fly, depending on what kind of situation you're in, or even if you're just getting bored and want to mix things up. If that's not enough, each skill then has a bunch of its own modifiers to customize it even further. Amara, I think, is probably one of the simplest of the bunch. Now, she's got 3 siren powers, and you just choose one to roll with and then press F to use it during combat. Phase Grasp is the one returning from previous games where you pluck an enemy up and hold them in the air, making it easier to focus on the tougher ones and dish out big damage. Her other ability is a Phase Slam where she slams into the ground dealing AoE damage. Then the final one is Phase Cast where she fires out this astral projection that just damages anything in its path. Customizing these abilities can be something as simple as choosing what kind of elemental effect it creates when hitting enemies. But I think all in all this is probably the closest in terms of the style of the builds that we got in the previous games. It's with the other characters though where it starts to get a bit more interesting. Right, so Mose is next up, and she's that cute looking chick who hops into a giant mech suit called the Iron Bear, which allows her to go ham on enemies until she runs out of fuel. The Iron Bear itself runs off a cooldown, but instead of different separate abilities, her skills instead are the bear's weapons. And these 3 are a minigun, grenade launcher, and a railgun. And then you choose to equip 2 out of the 3, assigning them to the left or the right hand.
Fuck, you're so cool. That is so sick, man.
Like you might go minigun in one and then grenade launcher in the other. choosing how to customize each weapon as you want to, like turn the grenade launcher into a fast-firing missile barrage as an example. Zane's kind of unique too. Now this guy can have 2 skills both on separate cooldowns, in lieu of using a grenade mod. He can throw down a protective barrier, he can drop a decoy hologram that attracts and attacks enemies, or send out a drone that can do a bunch of things, like straight out attacking, or buffing the player with things like increased movement speed. Zane's also got a bunch of kill skills that give him things like increased movement speed, reload time, fire rate, and then more damage the faster you're moving. These kill skills initially start off at about 7 seconds before they run out, but it can be upgraded to 15 seconds and it resets with every kill. So once you've maxed all of these out and they're active all at once, you're basically running around for 15 seconds like the goddamn Doomslayer.
Not so fast, Vault Thief. Got some fam who'd love to eat ya.
Flak the Beastmaster then rounds out the final character, and this guy's a sort of robotic hunter who has access to 3 different pets that are always activated, and 3 other abilities that work off a cooldown. One of these pets is a little monkey thing armed with a shotgun that increases your base movement speed, and it can also throw barrels at enemies, which is, you know, awesome.
I like you better dead.
Or you can have your own pet skag that increases your base damage, or a spider ant that is always regenerating your health. The build that I ran with Flak was one where he went invisible for a short period of time, giving him 3 guaranteed critical hits. When this thing's upgraded though, Flak can stay cloaked for the entire duration of the ability, dealing critical hits with every single shot before it runs out. And this really highlights how over the top you can make the Vault Hunters with certain builds. These games have always been about finding that right combination of skills to maximize your ass-kicking potential. Later on with Amara, by the time I'd almost hit level 50, I had it to the point where after I'd killed an enemy with Phase Grasp, it would just go ahead and grab another enemy straight away, and I could do this like 3 or 4 times. And when I was playing Zane, I was killing enemies so quickly that my kill skills were almost always active. Do you kinda see where I'm going with this? The way you can build your characters up in this game and turn the screen into a mess of particles and body parts is just insane. And I'm only really scratching the surface with each character. I mean, you could easily spend an entire video just talking about the build for each of them, going into detail on how it all works and factors into the gameplay. So I think that people saying that this is just more of the same, or rather just looking at it on the surface, or have completely missed the point of these new builds and how robust they can really be. Having said that though, in the grand scheme of things, Borderlands 3 still follows along that similar vein, where you just really move from area to area to complete that new main story mission, getting distracted along the way by all the very side missions. There's even certain missions that are almost like these giant scripted events, and the scale of some of them is just really impressive. We just really haven't seen anything like this in the series to date. It's a journey that's going to take you across multiple planets, dealing with different alien species and the many members of the Children of the Vault. I think the writing in Borderlands 3 though has been blown a bit out of proportion. From what I've read some people saying online, they're saying it's got the worst writing in the entire series. To be honest, I think the writing has been bad since Borderlands 2, and I don't think the writing in this is any worse than that. It is definitely bad at times though, like there's one bit in particular that has to be one of the cringiest and unfunniest things I've ever seen in a video game. Where this character was doing this impression of a space monkey over the radio that went on for like 5 minutes. It was like someone dragging their fingernails across a goddamn chalkboard. Speaking of fingernails across a chalkboard, yeah, Tiny Tina returns. And the end credits song is Nelly Furtado. Like, why?
Here it is!
The Calypso twins are incredibly annoying and extremely unlikable, but maybe that's the point. The whole idea of them being these 2 characters that are seen as gods by their brainless followers could be construed as being a bit of a commentary on YouTubers, streamers, and, you know, social media influencers. Yeah, influencers. Those people in their mid-20s who think they've got the wisdom to give out life advice, simply because they've got a certain amount of people that follow them. Tyreen and Troy have a complete disregard and disdain for pretty much everything and everyone. Even when it delves into their backstories, it doesn't really have any kind of payoff. They're just remorseless assholes that we find out are bad eggs from the start. Even Handsome Jack had a better character arc than this.
Gods don't negotiate! I love it! Love it!
Now, this isn't sophisticated comedy writing, and it doesn't have to be, but I still think the level of jokes and writing in a video game should be funnier than that class clown you knew from your high school who drew dicks on all the desks.
My bad. Finger slipped.
Half the time you can't hear what anyone's saying anyway, because most of the exposition in the game is delivered while you're moving around the game world. Often when you're in combat with a dozen enemies, where explosions and blood-curdling screams cover up any dialogue that might be getting delivered. I guess my point is that in a series that's always had questionable writing and a poorly told story, Borderlands 3 doesn't do anything all that different. At least it's not written by Anthony Birch anymore though, so that's a plus. I think what I like most about the whole thing though was more noticing the smaller changes they'd made, where you can see that refining down of elements that the series has become known for. By the last game, the whole thing had become a bit of a well-oiled machine, whether you like that machine or not, and what they've done here is just work on improving that. The first and most obvious thing is the presentation. Borderlands 3 runs on the Unreal 4 engine, which doesn't look earth-shatteringly better, but it's more the subtle effects you're going to notice. Like just how much better the lighting looks as an example. The way certain weapons or surfaces reflect the world back in real time, and the size and scope of some of the environments really does trump whatever else they pulled off in the previous games. I think the cyberpunk streets of Promethea are a bit of a highlight, along with the planet Athenas, a very Nepalese-inspired looking environment with temples and monks situated high in the mountains. And it really is a pretty damn good looking game. And I attest that to the amount of times I just stood still and spent 15 seconds staring off into the sky, marveling at the backdrop. The problem though is that it doesn't really run all that well. In fact, it often runs really crappy. I've got a GTX 2070 and most of the time I can get pretty decent frames, but during heavy combat the game becomes really sluggish. And this seemed to happen regardless of what settings I used. Updating my drivers did help a bit, I think, but the problem seems to stem from Borderlands 3's anti-piracy measures, which allegedly uses some kind of method that saps your bandwidth and tanks performance. On top of that, some people have even reported issues like input delay and the game crashing on DirectX 12. Animations have been really improved as well, starting with something as simple as the player now being able to see their own legs. You can vault up certain ledges, and if you're high enough in the air and press the crouch button, you'll now do this slam move, pounding into the ground below, hopefully into enemies. You can even slide down hills now because someone at Gearbox played Apex Legends. Enemy animations as well are just superb, they look a hell of a lot smoother. Sometimes too when an enemy's hit by an explosive weapon, they'll actually ragdoll getting launched up in the air, which looks pretty cool. And the AI has really been scaled up to take advantage of this. You'll often see them dodge out of the way of an incoming projectile, and they'll use cover a hell of a lot more and retreat if need be. Outside of that though, Borderlands 3 now has actual boss fights, as in boss fights that require strategy to defeat, bosses that have multiple phases and even take up your entire field of view. There are genuinely cool fights in this thing now, where you'll have to pay attention to your surroundings and the patterns in which the boss is attacking you, and you might even die a few times. This is a good thing. Along with that, you'll still be fighting the same band of freaks and mutants, including psychos and midgets. Oh, I'm sorry, they're called tinks now because we're not allowed to use the word midget anymore, because apparently it's like offensive or ableist or some shit. I don't know. And then you've got those quality of life improvements too. Like now you can fast travel from anywhere on the map to another fast travel station at any time. You can even fast travel back to your vehicle as well, instantly. You can now refill all of your ammo without having to go through one of Marcus's vending machines and refilling each type separately. You just press Q on the vending machine and it's all topped up.
Now get out of here. That ammo won't shoot itself.
In a nice touch and a welcome addition, friendly AI can now revive you, which makes solo play a bit more bearable if you haven't got someone to play with. Most importantly though, you can now make it so that loot is instanced for each player, so you don't have to worry about someone else stealing the best stuff from right underneath your nose, unless you want it that way. This is going to make public games a lot more tolerable. I know I'm not the only one who's been on the bad end of some dickbag that ninjas all the good loot and then leaves. Enemies and loot's also going to scale to the level of the individual player. So if you're level 25 and your buddy's level 15, you're both going to get the same benefits from killing enemies. I also like that when epic or legendary loot drops, you get a little sound effect that makes it more recognizable. And legendaries are a lot more common now to drop as well, making the whole thing even more addictive. Oh, and if you miss any loot, it gets collected for you and can be reclaimed from a machine back at Sanctuary. I mean, these are just minor changes, and if you've never played a Borderlands game before, you might not even notice this stuff. But this is the kind of thing that people have been clamoring for, so to finally have these kind of improvements is awesome. The only thing I still think kinda sucks is the UI. Maybe they'll finally fix that though for Borderlands 4. Oh, and we have to talk about the guns, right? Yep, Borderlands 3 also does that whole thing of throwing a bazillion guns at the player. This is a looter shooter in every sense of the word, and you'll be constantly coming across new guns, grenades and class mods and shields.
Holy crap.
At one point you even get a gun that shoots out guns. Yeah, that's a thing. Sound effects are way better than the last couple of games too. In fact, I think this might have some of the best sound design in the entire series. Every single weapon just feels like you're unleashing hell in terms of the oomph that it carries across. Weapons have electric, corrosive, fire and radiation effects, and they all just sound awesome. Beneath it all, you've got Jesper Kid returning to deliver another amazing soundtrack, and I don't think I heard a bad track in the entire campaign. There's guns in here that often defy convention and are just way out of left field. Like, how about the fact that the Children of the Vault guns need to be started up like a car engine before you can fire them? At one point I had an SMG that when I reloaded it would turn into a spider brain robot that would then go off and kamikaze on nearby enemies. One weapon I had was a rocket launcher that shot out these 3 giant homing blades. What was supposed to be a submachine gun was instead a flamethrower, because, you know, that makes sense. There was another gun I found that was a revolver that fired out 4 mini rockets per shot, and that was as devastating as it sounds. I even came across a laser-guided RPG at one point that was a pretty blatant reference to Half-Life 2. People have also gone ahead and found some of the legendary weapons in the game, some of which are ridiculous, like the shotgun from Doom 2016. Not gonna lie though, I kinda got a semi from that. The manufacturer for the guns plays a pretty big part in the way the weapons behave, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. Like the weapons made by the Children of the Vault always have infinite magazines, but they overheat after being fired a certain amount, requiring the player to rapidly cool them down. Thing is though, like the other Borderlands games, despite the fact you'll often come across these really neat weapons, a lot of the time the stuff you find is just complete dog shit. The vast majority of the guns in this game would be better used as a doorstop than a means of self-defense. Especially early on in the game, you're always just going to be juggling around 2 or 3 weapons that are complete rubbish. This means that until you get your hands on that one decent gun that gives you that power shift, the combat is going to feel super spongy, and you'll spend a fair bit of time in that second wind mode, shooting hopelessly at dickhead enemies that run away after they down you, defeating the purpose of a second wind mechanic existing in the first place. What also annoyed me early on was that every single gun has some kind of stupid gimmick or some kind of weird catch to it. Now look, I'm fine with these weapon gimmicks if they're actually useful. Like that revolver that shoots out rockets, I'm down for that. But a lot of these guns are just wacky for the sake of being wacky, and they're often not all that useful in combat. They've often got some kind of weird obstructive iron sight, or something else equally useless, like a 5x zoom on something like a pistol. And then it's got some idiotic feature like a burst fire mode where every 3rd shot sends out a cloud of fart gas. And then to top it all off, it takes 3 fucking hours to reload. And this kind of shows the biggest problem that Borderlands 3 has, and that's whether or not those RNG gods are going to treat you kindly and give you a bunch of good guns to use. And if that's the case, well, then the game becomes a lot more fun, and killing enemies becomes a lot more enjoyable. I found that the drop rate and the rarity of guns can often be weird too. Like for the final boss in the game, the final boss, I didn't get a single legendary weapon, I didn't even get any epics. Then the so-called Great Vault, the final vault of the game that you loot afterwards, which hasn't been opened in a bazillion years, was also filled with uncommon guns. The kind of trash you see pond scum bandits dropping. Can we also take a moment to reflect on how a vault that hasn't been opened in a bazillion years has weapons made by manufacturers that have only been around for the last few hundred years? Yeah, I know, suspension of disbelief, right? It all means nothing by the time you hit level 50 anyway, where legendaries drop so often that weapons lose all meaning and value. But getting to that point is a long, long journey. A single run took me about 25 or so hours. and by the end of it we were really just gunning for the main mission and avoiding all of the side missions. Only because I don't think there's any point to doing all of the side missions if you're just going to be doing them again in true Vault Hunter mode. Once you finish a single playthrough, you unlock Guardian ranks, which is basically the same as the Badass ranks from Borderlands 2, where you can incrementally upgrade those base stats across each character. As well as that, you get true Vault Hunter mode, which is replaying the entire campaign with tougher enemies until you hit the level cap of 50. Oh, and then there's the Mayhem Modes 1, 2, and 3, which you toggle on or off at Sanctuary. This makes enemies insanely tougher, but also greatly increases the quality of loot you get and the amount of experience and cash they drop. Don't play this mode though if you've got epilepsy, I mean, shit. So, all up though, with 4 characters, double playthroughs for each of them, and all there is to see and do, it's kinda hard to knock it on that front. In terms of the sheer bang for the buck, Borderlands 3 is humongous. Humongous. Playing a game for so much time, you're going to experience a few bugs here and there. And yeah, you'll see a fair bit of this stuff in Borderlands 3. At one point after playing with my mate for 4 hours, we both signed off to get some sunlight. When we came back though, we found the game hadn't saved his progress. And he was all the way back to where he started, losing 6 levels he'd gained and even all of his loot and everything too. During one session, I gained 9 Guardian points. But then when I logged out and back in later on, the ranks reset. And I now had minus 29 Guardian points, however that works. Oh, here's one too. If you open up your inventory before a cinematic starts, you'll see the overlay across the cinematic and even your character's portrait as well. The best one though was that during one of the final boss fights, after a cinematic, I fell through the goddamn map. Luckily I could get my buddy to enter a new area so I could respawn and pick up my loot, but this isn't the kind of thing you want to see in a AAA game that's been in development for years. Then there's some annoying, dare I say it, SJW stuff in this game too. Like, you know, renaming enemies from midgets to tinks, for instance, which isn't a huge thing, but it does show a bit of minor conformity from the devs, for something that isn't meant to be insulting to begin with. I'm Australian, and do you think I got insulted by how they portrayed people with Aussie accents in the pre-sequel? No, I didn't. But you don't see me asking them to go and change all the accents, do ya? But you know what? That stuff, it doesn't really matter. It shouldn't matter. In the same game where you've got a pet space monkey that runs around shooting things with a shotgun.
I like you better dead.
I think some people have kind of blown this game a bit out of proportion. And some people are making it out like playing it's like you're sending your family members to the guillotine or something. I had one person on Twitter tell me I had no principles for simply playing the game. Like, that's the kind of hysterical attitude that some people have towards this whole thing. I guess my point is that people should judge this game on the game itself, not on the platform it's being sold at. Look, I get it, the Epic Games Store is bad. No one likes it. Hard-working designers, artists, and developers shouldn't be punished because some number cruncher decided what was better for the bottom line.
Yep. Okay.
So in 12 months or so, once all the bugs have been patched out and the dust has settled, and people have spent enough time in the game to see all it has to offer, I think they'll realise at the end of the day that it's done a pretty good job of things in terms of what you want in a sequel. So if you're after a stylised, large, open-world first-person shooter that fetishises violence and borders on gun pornography, well, then Borderlands 3 is the game for you. Now, finally, have I ever told you that story about how I went to Randy Pitchford's house?